Good morning. It's Pop again, Dennis Murray. It's another beautiful day here in Maryland, a little cooler than yesterday. Morning sweater time. But I could still sit outside and have my coffee and watch the birds and the squirrels and a rabbit. And you wouldn't believe it, but the fox showed up again. I live in a town, but we do have some woods scattered around and pretty good size woods outside us, and a golf course that streams through the town. So animals you wouldn't expect in a little small 1 acre, 2 acre woods behind your house appear because they wander in from the larger woods nearby. So I'm sitting there at the table drinking my coffee, and here, 25 feet away, suddenly appears Mr. Fox, who's pretty healthy, good looking animal, nice long bushy hair and healthy frame. And of course, he wants to eat a squirrel if he can or jump a bird. But they had put the warning out, and there wasn't a thing to be found. But I couldn't believe it. I was reading my morning news feeds from my newspapers online. So I had my cell phone in my hand, and here he just appears and literally was 25 feet away. And so I was able to snap a picture or two before he figured out that there was somebody at the table and took off. He was here a couple of weeks ago and he caught a squirrel. It was kind of shocking. It's, um, life and death right in front of your eyes in the backyard. But I didn't dare take my camera out because you know, I was just mesmerized by the sight and didn't want to lose it by trying to find my cell phone and get it in frame and all that. Okay, so a lot of background, but life is short, and if you're fortunate enough to be having coffee on your veranda and a fox appears, you probably want to tell people about it. Okay, so a couple of more manual things first. Very happy to tell you that I have created a web page, dennismurray.net. And if you remember, Dennis is spelled with one N. Um, and the whole point of the web page is it just has a few pictures and some info. I might use it for blogging, but right now it's to coordinate things. So it has my YouTube videos, a link to the channel on YouTube that I have. It's called Change the World. And a subscribe button, and you can watch any individual video that you want. And it also has a link to Amazon to my three published books. And we'll add the link in due time to when the fourth book is up in sometime later this year. And it also references a new Facebook page I created, Pop the Philosopher. What the hell? It took me a long time to get used to actually being a philosopher because I don't have any degrees. I'm self-appointed philosopher and I'm self-employed as a philosopher, as in it doesn't pay a dime, but it's what I really wanted to do with my life, and I was finally able to afford to stop working for money and start being a philosopher, and it's a rare privilege. But I'm comfortable now that I've worked at it long enough and I've produced some work product to say, yeah, I am a philosopher. I'm not a philosophy teacher. Um, I honestly don't know enough about philosophy to be a philosophy teacher. I only know this small part at the base or beginning of philosophy called mythopoetic, and where we come up with essentially stories, hopefully wise stories that help us get comfortable with the world and proceed to live our lives with joy and vigor, and to use our gifts in a way that as we get older, we'll feel like we've had a well lived life. So I have to credit that a young friend, Dylan Taylor, did my net webpage, and Dylan can be reached at dill at dylantaylor.com. He does web pages. He also has a really good podcasts, and he's done some YouTube videos. He's a pretty knowledgeable guy, and I felt very fortunate to have his services. Um, so now, today is the Popcast 34, and the title is More on Psychological Type. Now, if you remember yesterday, we were talking about that perhaps it was good advice, the advice I gave the day before about how to deal with extreme view holders when you want to invite them to the middle. And my advice was you've got to find your own wisdom, that people are so complicated and facts are so complicated that no set of words is adequate to give you practical advice about what to do in any circumstance. Um, part of the evidence for the correctness of that point of view is that the Ten Commandments occupy half a page of type, but there's 75,000 books written to discuss what they might mean. And the the Old Testament has its own giant set of traditions, Talmudic traditions, explaining what each and every line means. And it's like a law library. You pass a law, then you have cases about the law, then you have to have the cases, and then maybe some more laws get passed. And in due time, there's this giant room full of law books that cover both the laws as the government has passed them and as the courts have treated them, and back and forth and back and forth. And each year they have to rewrite a lot of the books, and each year they send you a little paper part that goes in the back of the book that brings it up to date. At least that's what it was when I practiced law. But of course, since then, all that's gone with the computers and the internet, etc. But the point being that very quickly, any small set of words becomes inundated by tens of thousands of volumes about what those words might mean. The U.S. Constitution. I remember taking constitutional law at Georgetown Law, and it was a fabulous course. I just loved it. But wow, a lot. Okay, so the point being, I think I'm on pretty good ground looking around, looking for whether it was wise to say, find your own wisdom. And I feel fairly comfortable. But one of the things I pointed to as part of why find your own wisdom was good advice was psychological types. I wanted to talk a little bit more about that today. Now, we've talked about psychological type in the past, I think just a couple of weeks ago, but who can keep track? And I remember quite well that we talked about two books, Gifts Differing by Isabel Briggs Myers, and this revision of it has her son Peter Myers as a co-author. And this book, Please Understand Me, which is one of a number of books about what's called temperament. And type and temperament are related fields in psychology trying to figure out, are there patterns that people can be said to fall into that would be useful to keep in mind when dealing with people? Because people are different from each other. And if you can find some kind of a pattern to the differences, even if it doesn't adequately describe or accurately describe the person you're talking to, it will give you an insight into things that they quite possibly would prefer you to use in addressing them, things that might be more persuasive to them. So I want to introduce another book, um, uh, People Types and Tiger Stripes. And I had the very good fortune of spending some time with Gordon Lawrence, the author, um, way back when Dick Hartzell and I were spending time at the national conventions of the Association for Psychological Type. And Dick had been on the board of that organization, and he introduced me to, a lot of the stellar figures in type, including Gordon Lawrence. We had just some lovely conversations. Um, and I'll put link to this book on the description of today's YouTube. Um, so you'll have it for the future. But I just wanted to read a couple of things. He says that, in this part, he's quoting somebody else. Uh, but but he says that recognition of type differences, when carried over into the field of person-to-person relationships, may afford a useful system for understanding others whose attitudes or actions seem unreasonable. I do think that is a fair description of the way we feel about a lot of people on a lot of occasions. So what he's saying is you're going to have plenty of opportunity to put type to use in your personal life. And and he says type theory holds that type differences yield differences in what people are interested in and what they value and their problem solving techniques. So that, as I've said before about the feature that I noticed, that because of our specialized psychological skills, which type is, essentially indicating that different types of people have different skills that are more prominently developed in them. Because of those skills being highly developed in some of us, not in others, it leads us to work in groups so that in the group we have somebody who's got a highly developed version of that skill. And as a result, the group is more effective um, than it would be if all of us had equal levels of development of the skills. And because if everybody has equal, believe me, it won't all be superior. The the way you get a highly developed version of a skill is you have a lower developed version of the rest of the skills. You spend your time and energy on this and you neglect that. But when a bunch of people come together, um, then collectively they get the advantage of all of the skills at a highly developed level. And that's a hell of a lot better problem solving group than it would be if everybody had the equal level of ordinary development. Nobody had highly developed. It has a lot to do with our thriving as a species. And so type is onto something really powerful, biologically valid, psychologically valid. And here at the end, he's talking about when compromise between opposite types is necessary, the best compromise is that which preserves to each party the advantage he considers most important. The sensing type wants the solution to be workable. The thinker wants it systematic. The feeling type wants it humanly agreeable. And the intuitive wants a door left open for growth and improvement. And um, no one man has to be good at everything. He only has to be good at his own stuff and decently appreciative of the other fellows. Together, thanks to their differences, they can do a better job if they were all just alike. So, nice book to add to our compendium. I'm running a bit long today, but I'm going to continue for a few more minutes. Now, in addition to psychological type, illustrating the differences, our complexity such that in any particular set of advice is not going to be worth much. That you're more or less well advised to find your own wisdom in any particular situation. Um, there's this whole thing about awe. It's another example of how complicated we are. So that's how it fits in to today's podcast. Um, so I've talked about awe a certain amount thus far, but I haven't really made the details about how many different how differently people experience awe. And I'm going to talk not any more than a moment further today about two books on awe that I found recently. One of them is by Paul Pearsall, um, and it's called Awe. The subtitle is The Delights and Dangers of Our 11th Emotion. Pearsall is a psychologist and noted psychologist, and he's pointing out that the great majority of psychologists feel that there are 10 fundamental emotions, and that awe is not one of them. And he feels that awe should be considered the 11th. And then another book called The Rediscovery of Awe by Kirk Schneider, PhD. Um, and Schneider is talking quite a bit about his views about awe based on his experience as a psychologist. And I'm going to explore both of these books in more detail in coming days. Um, I just want to finish with two quick notes. My wife, Gail, never could connect with all the way I do. She started with the idea of God, and she really just couldn't go behind it to find that all that may have led to that idea. It just wasn't something that was there for her. And my daughter Betsy of says that she starts from gratitude, and she is quite happy to start from gratitude and walk forward with it. Her, gratitude is very, very important in her life. She feels it strongly. She lives it, and she talks about it a lot. And she paints rocks with, you know, words like joy and and gratitude and hope on them, and she puts them in people's yards and all sorts of places. I have a couple out back, and that Gail and I painted one day with Betsy. Um, so but Betsy says I don't go behind um, gratitude towards this experience of awe. So she said I actually, I'm not entirely sure I'm connecting to what you're talking about, but I think so. But she said certainly I have I start from gratitude, and Gail said I start from God. So this whole thing needs to be explored quite a bit. Yeah, I'm talking about awe as where you go to refresh yourself and your sense of connection to others as the way you change your life. If that is not an experience you've ever had, um, then we need to talk further to explore all of this and develop it and show that it actually does connect in everybody's life. It just may not be. It may be in a variety of forms and more or less conscious in some instances. So enough for today. Okay, see you tomorrow. Take care.